Meet Teacher Tony. Teacher Tony is having difficulty engaging his students in learning about resource sustainability and waste. His current curriculum doesn't build communication and collaboration skills or promote critical thinking and problem solving. He feels his students are passive participants in the learning process. Teacher Tony needs help.
I can't get my students to learn higher order thinking skills and problem solving.
Why don't you use Constructivism to help transform your teaching so that students are actively engaged with problem solving in meaningful contexts?
What's Constructivism?
Constructivism is a learning theory that equates learning with creating meaning from experience.
Huh?
Learning is more meaningful to students when they are able to interact with a problem or concept. Constructivism can help engage and motivate your students by making them take on a more active role in the learning process. Constructivism utilizes interactive teaching strategies to create meaningful contexts that help students construct knowledge based on their own experiences.
Huh?
You've probably seen Constructivism at work and didn't even know it. Constructivism is often used to teach higher order thinking skills such as reasoning and problem solving, while also helping students transfer their knowledge to new and different situations. Common examples of Constructivism include role-playing or simulating a historical event or time period, debating controversial current event issues and topics, utilizing cooperative learning groups to teach multiple perspectives, and allowing students to engage in real-world activities like internships. Now let's see if we can apply the principles of Constructivism to help solve Teacher Tony's problem. First, Teacher Tony must decide how to actively engage his students in the topic. Teacher Tony decides to utilize the idea of problem-based learning to actively engage his students by challenging them to answer a real-world problem. Teacher Tony came up with the following essential question.
How can we reduce waste to help sustain Earth's resources?
Teacher Tony planned the following activities to help students answer the essential question. First, students will tour a local waste and recycling plant to learn firsthand how waste and recycling materials from their community are handled. Next, students will weigh and record how many pounds of food scraps their family puts into the regular trash each day. Then in groups, students will further research solutions to the problems in books, on the internet, and by interviewing experts around their community and the country using the telephone and Skype. Finally, the student groups will determine how they want to demonstrate their solutions to the essential question. Examples might include student-created books, slideshows, and public service announcements about recycling and the 4 R's. These learning artifacts could be displayed to members of the community and parents at a family recycling night. After implementing these principles of Constructivism, Teacher Tony's students are more actively involved in their learning by engaging in problem solving, higher order thinking skills, and collaborative work.
Using Constructivism really helped engage my students.
If you're wanting to build problem solvers and critical thinkers, then you can use Constructivism to solve your problems, just like Teacher Tony.
Constructivism. Constructivism is a very important topic. I have seen this question on comps before, and I have been kind of shocked that people don't really understand it. So I have made sure we made Constructivism a major topic in all courses that I teach. So let's make sure we go over this. I have several parts to this. One, you just watched a video. The second part is going to be from a textbook that I got. It defines Constructivism. That's what we're looking at now. And then we're going to go look at one more. We're going to look at a in-depth look at it. And then we're going to look at another article. And then we'll come back and end it with Piaget. So what is Constructivism? Constructivism is, it says right here, When we study reforms in education through the curriculum standards, this book says this, this idea of constructivism emerges. So I'm going to scroll down. The basic belief of constructivism is that problem solving is at the heart of learning, thinking, and development. Constructive teaching and learning recognizes that knowledge is created in the mind of each learner and that effective teaching approaches delve into the learner's mind through active learning, learner-generated inquiry, concrete, authentic experiences, collaborative investigations, discussion, etc., etc. But much of the change initiatives taking place in school reform advocates practices that are considered constructive teaching practices. So constructivism, to go back, is that it's this idea of problem solving is at the heart of thinking, and that everyone's brain, there's something going on in someone's head. Constructivism is not a method or a strategy as defined in the chapters, but rather a theory about knowledge and learning that is changing how teachers perceive their instructional roles and their students' roles. Teachers must focus on making connections between facts and fostering new understanding in students. A constructive classroom is highly student-centered. Once again, it is highly student-centered. Students are encouraged to reflect on new information and ideas. Teachers do not teach, they become facilitators in the learning process, and they help students to reflect on and monitor their own academic performance. Rather than covering a topic, teachers uncover concepts to help the students build their own associations. Students build their own unique understandings of content, which may or may not be accurate understandings. If the student simply memorizes the information without giving it to the other meaning, it will be difficult to recall. The research and theory based on the constructive approach is not about teaching, but rather about how people know and what they know. The ultimate component, the ultimate root of constructivism comes from Jean Piaget, a Swiss scholar concerned with cognitive development and the formation of knowledge. He examined how people came to know their world. Before Piaget, outside the reading here, before Piaget, people thought that children were just young adults, meaning that if a child did bad, they should know better they're young adults. Piaget showed by interviewing children that they knew differently. They saw the world differently. Now, today we know that whenever you ask a child, you ask them questions. Bill Cosby made a show, stuff that kids say, crazy things that kids say, because it shows you that kids think differently in this world. Piaget discovered that. Now, of course, we think that's not groundbreaking, but back then it was. Piaget saw the human mind as a dynamic set of cognitive structures that help us make sense of what we perceive. These structures grow in intellectual complexity as we mature and as we interact with the world. Through maturation and experience, the groundwork for a new structure is laid. Now, Piaget's works have been built on, obviously. The American Psychological Association in 1993 published the Learning-Centered Psychological Principles. 12 principles have been memorized. So, students continue on application of practice. These 5 generalizations from cognitive science taken separately have been known by teachers for a long time. And look at these 5. Students' prior knowledge influences their learning. Look at these number 5 right here. The prior knowledge influences learning. Students need to think about their own learning strategies. Motivation has a powerful effect on learning, which motivation we saw in the other one. Development and individual differences influence learning. The classroom social context influences learning. So, if you see a test question that says, what is the idea of constructionism? You know it's Piaget, and you know it's those 5 topics right there. That your prior knowledge influences your learning. You need to think about your own learning strategies. Meta, there it is. Motivation has a powerful effect on learning. Motivation, big key right there. Development and individual differences influences learning. The way you develop all the little differences you have in your life. And the classroom social context influences learning. Some educators call this constructive approach a paradigm shift or a new mental model of learning. As you continue on, constructivism presents a dilemma in decision-making for the teacher who has been schooled with the behavioral orientation, Bloom's, and is comfortable in the role of the teacher as the deliverer of knowledge. It raises the questions such as, How does the teacher assess the student's prior knowledge and then build on their current understanding? Wouldn't it be more time effective to present the information in a direct teaching approach? If learning is facilitated by social interaction, how much control can the teacher exert to determine if the interaction is on task and learning is actually taking place? How productive can a noisy classroom be? See, with Piaget, you're going to bring in noise. How much direction should the teacher provide? This becomes outside the teacher's elements, outside their teacher's box. They have issues with this because they feel like they can't control it. Such questions need to be studied through one's professional readings. Practice. Do this with a small class. Let them work on what they know, what they understand. Constructivist teachers' view of learning causes them to expect their students to be able to explain, find evidence and examples, generalize, apply, represent the concept or principle in a new way. They give assignments that push students to use in-life applications or situations, what they have learned. So the students have to do work on their own. Such assignments are called authentic tasks. An example of an authentic activity is planning a playground for a new neighborhood apartment complex. This assignment challenges students to use their knowledge in geometry, health, and human development. So the Association for Supervision and Development reported in the February, there's a citation, researchers developed a 4-part framework to encourage teaching for understanding. Here it is. Here's how a teacher can make this work. Use generative topics. Teachers and students generate topics that are essential to a discipline, meaning to the students, and connectable to topics inside and outside the discipline. Develop understanding goals. Teachers and students need to identify, you work as a team with your students. What do you need to own a goal? The purpose of the goals is to focus instruction. Plan active experiences that build understanding performances. So as a teacher, there's where you actually need to do your work. You need to plan activities that will lead towards this. And last, conduct ongoing assessments. So for example, you sit down with your students and you say, okay, we need to understand what topic we want to learn today. And you focus on that topic and you say, okay, now, what goals do we have individually for everyone? And everyone sets up their goals. Then as a teacher, you back away and you plan activities based on their goals and what they want to learn, and you build upon that. Then you conduct ongoing assessments to make sure they're doing well. You will encourage students to develop the criteria that can measure their learning progress. All right, so that is what constructivism is. So constructivism, once again, let's make sure we understand what constructivism is. It is teaching and learning. Okay, the basic belief is that problem solving is at the heart of learning, thinking, and development. And it's based on this Piaget model. So I'm going to show you, this next video is going to be a video, it talks about, they ask these scholars what they think about various topics. And this is just a real quick video on constructivism. So let's see that. In the real world.
So in the Matrix, what you've got is the whole world is a computer program, right? And what makes Neo special is that he can break the rules of the program. And so that's what gives him his phenomenal sort of cosmic powers in the digital realm that descend into really, really bad film by the third installment. What Neo can do is change the rules that the world is based on. And for a constructivist, that's what people are doing all the time. Some people are better placed to do it than others. So, it's much easier for Barack Obama to change some of the rules that the world is based on than for me or you, just because people will listen. And that itself is a product of some of the rules that the world is based on. So there's this sort of endless cycle where we're constantly changing these rules, we're constantly changing the way social life works in little bitty ways that are themselves framed by the way social life already works. Well, constructivists want to see the world as something that we build out of the way we relate to each other. So think about this. If everybody woke up tomorrow morning and we decided that the United States just doesn't exist, well, it doesn't exist anymore. because what makes up the United States isn't the buildings and the bombs and the votes. It's everybody thinking that those things make up the United States, and that we agree that we act and we treat each other as if the United States is there. And it's all of that agreement and all of those beliefs and ideas that give us the United States. And so for a constructivist, the same thing applies to the whole rest of social life, and that includes international relations. You just can't have international politics unless you have a set of ideas. You have to have a set of ideas about there are states. States have foreign policies. When I want to talk to a state, I go talk to the head of the state. I don't just talk to a random person from that state. You have an idea that there are authority structures, there are legitimate governments, and that's how you carry out international relations. And the interesting part for a lot of constructivists is, the sort of question of how much of that belief structure do you have to share before you can have international relations at all? So, you can imagine, some alien comes down from Mars and doesn't share any of our belief structures, has no idea what states are. You couldn't establish diplomatic relations with Mars if the alien doesn't even know what a state is. So a lot of questions that constructivists ask take place at much longer time scales than questions that realists or liberals might ask. So, whereas a realist might ask, okay, what would have been the best way for a state to maximize its security in the 1600s? A constructivist would ask, what made people think there were states in the 1600s? I had the example of, if everybody woke up tomorrow and decided the U.S. didn't exist anymore, right? The end of the Cold War, that was kind of what happened to the USSR, is people got up one day and they started thinking that maybe this shouldn't exist anymore. And so this, what happens is people get up one day and they decide that maybe it's not that important that that wall's there. And they start going through the wall. And then the soldiers that are guarding the wall decide, well, maybe it's not that important that I shoot these people when they go through the wall. And then it goes from there, and the government starts deciding, well, all right, maybe it's not that important that we keep these people out of the wall. And then it continues, and people start deciding, well, maybe it's not that important that we're part of the USSR anymore. And, very, very rapidly, this whole house of cards disintegrates. And there's all sorts of reasons why. There were economic problems, there were political issues, and this should not at all be taken to think that there weren't. But at the end of the day, the USSR would have kept going until everybody decided it was time to stop. And, 1989 to 1991, they decided it was time to stop. And it stopped. All of these things that you take as being natural and given just because they're habitual, you have to be able to realize could be some other way, and are at some level the choice is arbitrary. At some level, what we do, that red means stop, is a random choice. Could have been green, could have been yellow, could have been purple. And there's so much of the way we live everyday life that's like that. Because if we had to stop and think about those things all the time, our brains would explode. You have to kind of make your brain explode a little bit.
Okay, so now we look at this video, this article, and it talks about a student-centered guest lecturing, a constructivism approach to promote student engagement. So now that you know what the definition of constructivism is, and you saw it kind of like the real world with that video, you know what constructivism is, a student-centered where they guide. You now start seeing research articles that say a student-centered guest lecturing. Okay, I know what that means. Student-centered guest lecturing. Student-centered, that sounds like constructivism. Colon, a constructivism approach to promote student engagement. So this is, just reading this title, since you know what it is a constructive approach where they allow students to do guest lecturing to build their own information and their own learning. So it's rather here. Student engagement has become a big challenge in higher education, okay? Especially when distance learning is getting more and more popular. Guest lecturing is a popular method to bring relevance to the classroom and engage the students. Ground on the theory of constructivism, this paper introduces a student-centered guest lecturing that allows students to work in teams and participate in each step of the process. Just like constructivism, such as preparation, interviewing, and reflection. Our pilot study showed that the proposed approach can effectively engage in students. See, so this is a constructivism paper. And then as you go through here, they do an introduction. They talk about online learning, how it's grown dramatically, and then they also talk about how the motivation is becoming an issue. Academic institutions seeking to embrace new paradigms, such as guest lecturing or speaking, seek to do so as a means of continuously improving efficacy, improving student learning experiences. See, you see that continued theme from previous articles, which says that there is an issue with student engagement and enjoyment, especially when you get into online classes. So, yeah, that's becoming a big issue right throughout all the research. Universities, which have had a history of poor teaching, are now going online, which is carrying over that boring teaching. And they're like, well, that's not good. So universities are saying, hey, if we're going to go online, we got to get better than this because it's getting even worse. And students are not happy. So they're approaching it with constructivism. So they're just going back to what Piaget did and stressed years ago. So as we go down here, theoretical background, research framework. As popular introduction to theory, constructivism encourages experimental learning, hands-on learning, and collaborative learning, and is well adopted in the educational domain. Well, of course, this form of pedagogy has also been identified as a necessary strategy for a learner-centered approach. The paper proposes to incorporate constructive approach in the traditional guest speaker approach. So, research framework, research questions. Constructivism, guest lecturing, entering it, they're going to bring it together with this chart into student-centered guest lecturing. Then it's going to be perceived student engagement, actual student engagement. So, research framework. When students are actively involved in the guest lecturing process, they will be more eager to learn, thus more engaged in the class. So, what they're doing is they're taking you are a guest lecturer, and they're actually going to say, we're going to make it into a constructive approach. All right, so students outlines selection of subject experts, student team formation, generate interview questions. So, they made it where it was more of a constructive approach. First, the selection of the subject matter expert should be carefully aligned. So they're just showing you on this page a step-by-step process that they did to make sure that there was more student involved and more of a constructivist approach. Students first study the course content and then they work in the groups. The instructor plays a critical role in the student-centered approach. The instructor needs to identify appropriate guest speakers for the class and set clear expectations. So just like the article we looked at before, or the book chapter we looked at, when the student-centered begins and then the professor backs off and then goes, and then the professor does the work behind the scenes, such as setting up guest speakers for the class and then monitor students' behavior. So the professor walks in and starts doing that work as well, just like Piaget called for. And on the other hand, the instructor should avoid getting into a dominant role in each stage except selection of subject matter experts. Yes, that's what Piaget said. Piaget said that they should not, in the constructive approach, you should not be, dominant. You should back away. Let the students run the show and you do everything else. They're learning by themselves and you're helping them. In other words, the instructor should act as a facilitator. That's what constructivism says. They're just copying constructivism. And this is their research design. It's going to be 2 academic semesters, an entire year, and they're going to study period 1 and 2, and that's how they do that. Pilot study. The researchers conducted a pilot study, so this is their research study, how they did this. Let's look at their findings. Student engagement is becoming increasingly important in higher education, especially for distance learning setting. Guest lecture is a common approach to bring relevance to the class, and it has the potential to make students more interested and more involved in the class. Built on a constructivism philosophy, this paper proposes an innovative student-centered approach to maximize the guest lecturing impact. The pilot study showed promising results. The proposed approach will be beneficial to our colleagues in higher education who are interested in increased student engagement. There are a few limitations to the study, of course. The success of the approach depends on the available resources. For example, it may not be easy to identify. The institution may, but also the biggest one is You're going to have a teacher who's willing to do this, a teacher who's willing to give up the power of the online course and to allow the students to have a more student-centered and student-led, a constructive approach. This article is just really good, and it especially ties into the first article when we looked at what constructivism is, and then we kind of talked it in the video in the real world scenario, and then we look at this article and we see, oh, now I'm seeing what constructivism is. But as an educator, beyond this article, as an educator, you have to be willing to back away from the direct instruction and let the students work upon themselves and learn upon themselves, and you be a facilitator. Of course, in doing that, student classes are going to be wilder, they're going to be louder, but they're going to be more energized. And some teachers are afraid that louder, wilder, and energizer means I have no classroom management skills, and that is not the truth. That is actually the opposite. So now you know what constructivism is. So the last thing I need to do is show you a video on Jean Piaget, because Jean Piaget is the founder of constructivism, and you need to make sure you know who that is. So now if you have a question on a test about constructivism, you know what it is. It's student-centered. And if you look at the previous, you can rewind the video, you can look back, and it shows you those 5 areas. So now you can answer this question. So let's look at a video on Piaget.
Now, a long time ago, people used to think that children were just miniature versions of adults, and that they thought in pretty much the same way. But then this guy Piaget came along, and he figured out that children actually reason quite differently. In fact, he believed that children are actively constructing their understanding of the world as they grow, so that as their bodies grow, their minds grow as well. And he thought that this happened generally in different stages. So I want to tell you about Piaget's 4 stages of cognitive development. So first, we start out with 0 to 2 years. And at this point, children are said to be in the sensory motor stage. So this word kind of makes sense. Sensory just comes from the senses. So he said children gather information about the world with their eyes, so through sight, smell, taste, hearing, and touch. So that's why whenever you see a baby 0 to 2 years, they're always touching stuff and putting it in their mouth. And then the motor part is that they are very active. As they discover how to use their senses, they also discover how to move their bodies around. And this helps them explore the world and learn what they're capable of. And the main task or awareness that develops during this time is object permanence. This just means that infants don't recognize that objects still exist even though they can't see them. So for example, if you give an infant a toy or something, say you have a nice ball for them, and you take it away, they won't look for it because they don't understand that it still exists. So the next stage occurs from about age 2 to right around 6 or 7 years. Now the reason I'm being a little wishy-washy on the years is because these are really just general guidelines. It's not really hard and fast rules of when these stages happen. So the next stage is the pre-operational stage. And the operational part just means mental operation. So imagining things or mentally reversing actions, things like that. And the thing to notice about this phase is that this is really when children start to develop and engage in pretend play. And they'll begin to be able to use symbols to represent things. What you might notice is that around age 2 is also when children learn to talk. And so as they learn that words symbolize objects, that starts to help them into the pre-operational stage and understand the idea of symbols. Children at this age are very egocentric. And that's not a bad thing. They're not just arrogant and bragging all the time. They just don't understand that other people have a different point of view than they do. So if you're ever watching TV with a child, like a 5-year-old, say, and they might sit down right in front of you and not understand that you can't see through them because they can see. Also, sometimes kids will try to hide from you at this stage by covering their eyes. The whole I can't see you, you can't see me idea. So then once they get to about age 7 to about age 11 years old, then they are in the concrete operational stage. And again, remember, operational means mental operations, and now they can do concrete operations. So this is where children learn the idea of conservation. So if you know a little kid and you want to see what stage of development they're in, then you can do this little test. It's pretty fun. It's easy. You take two identical glasses and pour the same amount of water in them and show them to the child and say which one has more. And kids will tell you they'll have the same amount. And then right in front of the child so that she sees you, you take one of those glasses and pour it into a short, fat glass. And then you take the other one and pour it into a tall, skinny glass. And then right away ask the child again, okay, which one has more? And up until concrete operational, the child's going to say the tall, skinny glass has more because the water's higher. But once they reach the concrete operational stage and understand that the amount of water doesn't change just because the glasses are different sizes, then they'll tell you that they both still have the same amount of water, even though they look different. So that's a fun little test. And at this stage, children can also begin to reason about mathematics. So they'll be able to understand that 8 plus 4 equals 12, and then that must mean that 12 minus 4 equals 8. So moving on up, children from about age 12 and up are in what Piaget called the formal operational stage. And that's when children are able to reason about abstract concepts and think about consequences of potential actions, so they're able to reason out what might occur. And also, Piaget thought that this was where really sophisticated moral reasoning began to take place. And at this point, children are reasoning more like adults, and they continue to develop that over time. Now, later developmentalists have come along and figured out that these stages aren't quite so discrete as Piaget may have originally thought. Children don't always develop these abilities within the certain age brackets, but they do tend to progress in a predictable fashion. And thanks to Piaget, now we know that children are more than just miniature adults. So go find a child and see what stage they're in. Test Piaget's theory yourself.